Imagine a sound so haunting it pulls you from your sleep. A chorus from nowhere that knows your name. This is the story of Blackthorn, and once you hear it, there's no turning back. Enjoy watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Samuel Carter arrived in Blackthorn on a rainy October evening, his camera bag slung over his shoulder. The freelance journalist had heard rumors of a ghost town where strange sounds echoed through the hills. The streets were empty, save for a crumbling church at the town's edge, its steeple piercing the gray sky. As he unpacked in the rented cabin, a faint hum drifted through the window, like a choir, but impossibly far away. That night, Samuel woke at 2:47 a.m. to the sound growing louder, a chorus of voices singing in a language he couldn't understand. He grabbed his recorder and stepped outside. The air was still, but the hymn seemed to come from the church. Peering through the cabin window, he saw nothing but darkness, yet the voices felt closer, as if they were inside the room. The next morning, Samuel visited the only open shop, a dusty general store. The clerk, an elderly woman named Marjorie, stared at him blankly when he asked about the church. "Don't go near it," she muttered, her hands trembling. "They sing for the ones they want." Before he could press further, a low note rang out, clear as day, and Marjorie dropped a jar, her eyes glazing over as she hummed along. Curiosity overpowered caution. That afternoon, Samuel approached the church. The doors were boarded, but a gap let him squeeze inside. The pews were rotting, the altar covered in cobwebs. Then the singing started, loud, overwhelming, vibrating through the walls. His recorder caught it all, voices chanting, "Samuel, Samuel," clear as a bell. He stumbled back, heart racing. Back at the cabin, Samuel played the recording. His name repeated endlessly, layered with other voices, some pleading, some laughing. That night, shadows moved outside his windows, tall, thin figures that vanished when he looked directly. In the morning, he found footprints circling the cabin, too large to be human, pressed deep into the mud. Desperate for answers, Samuel broke into the town hall's basement archives. Yellowed papers revealed Blackthorn's secret. In 1893, a choir vanished during a midnight mass, leaving only their hymnals behind. Locals claimed they never left, that the church kept them, singing forever. As he read, the lights flickered, and the singing returned, now inside the room. Days blurred together. The voices followed Samuel everywhere, through the woods, into his dreams. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, humming the tune without realizing it. One night, he woke to find himself walking barefoot toward the church, his recorder still running. The shadows were there, guiding him, their faces hollow and eyeless. Samuel's last recording was found weeks later by a hiker. The tape hissed with static, then his voice. "I hear them, they're inside me now." The singing swelled, a deafening chorus, until it cut off mid-note. The church stood silent again, but the townsfolk swore they heard one more voice added to the hymn that night. Blackthorn remains a ghost town. Visitors report a faint hum on windy nights, but no one stays long enough to investigate. The church doors are sealed again, though some say the boards shift slightly, as if something wants out. Samuel's camera was never found, but his name echoes in the silence. Blackthorn remains a ghost town. Visitors report a faint hum on windy nights, but no one stays long enough to investigate. The church doors are sealed again, though some say the boards shift slightly, as if something wants out. Samuel's camera was never found, but his name echoes in the silence. Blackthorn remains a ghost town. Visitors report a faint hum on windy nights, but no one stays long enough to investigate. The church doors are sealed again, though some say the boards shift slightly, as if something wants out. Samuel's camera was never found, but his name echoes in the silence. Months later, a young hiker named Clara Evans stumbled into Blackthorn, drawn by rumors of the abandoned town. She found Samuel's recorder by the church steps, its tape still intact. Curious, she pressed play. The chorus filled the air, and for a moment, she swore she heard her own name woven into the hymn. Clara decided to stay the night in an old house nearby, planning to explore more at dawn. As midnight struck, the singing returned, louder, more insistent. Shadows stretched across the walls, their eyeless faces turning toward her. She grabbed her flashlight, but its beam revealed nothing but empty air. By morning, Clara couldn't resist. She approached the church again, the boards now loose and swaying. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The hymn grew deafening, and she saw faint outlines. Dozens of figures in the pews, their heads bowed, singing without sound. One turned to her, its hollow face smiling. Clara fled, dropping her flashlight in panic. That night, back at the house, the singing didn't stop, it was inside her head now. She found her backpack unzipped, a single hymnal inside, yellowed pages filled with unreadable script. On the last page, her name was scrawled in red ink. The next day, Clara noticed the town wasn't as empty as she thought. Figures stood at the edges of the woods, silent but watching. The shop she'd passed was now lit, though no one entered or left. The hymn pulsed through her veins, and she caught herself humming along, her voice not her own. Clara fought to leave, driving her car toward the town's exit. The road looped back to the church, again and again. On her third try, the engine died, and the figures closed in. She locked the doors, clutching the hymnal, whispering, "I won't sing." But her lips moved anyway. A week later, a delivery driver found Clara's car abandoned, doors unlocked, the hymnal on the driver's seat. The church doors were wide open, the boards scattered. Inside, the pews were full, silent figures singing in unison. A new voice joined them, clear and strong, Clara's. Blackthorn whispers through the years. Travelers vanish, their names added to the choir. The church stands eternal, its hymn a lure no one escapes. Some say the town isn't abandoned, it's waiting, growing, feeding on every soul that hears the call. At night, a secret lies hidden within the dark walls of St. Andrew's Church. For years, the townspeople have avoided approaching this sacred place after dark. Which ancient priests, which cursed teachings, and a town youth who disappeared in one night. Everything began with the curse of Father Gregory, who vanished years ago. However, no one ever truly learned what happened that day. Tonight, we will uncover what lies behind that terrifying dark veil, where a brave young man dares to go. St. Andrew's Church was one of the oldest structures in the town. With its stone walls, faded stained glass windows, and towering dark wooden beams, it was not just a place of worship but a piece of the town's history. However, recently, the townspeople had begun to sense something wrong within the church. Everyone knew one thing: approaching the church after dark was like walking toward death. Rumors whispered through the streets. Strange sounds echoed from the church late at night, sounds that could sometimes be heard from the town square. One day, a group of villagers gathered near the church and began to discuss their growing fears. Among them, an elderly woman began to cry, saying, "The priest, that priest, cursed. We learned it from him." She was speaking of the town's former priest, Gregory. Years ago, Gregory had served as the head priest of the church, but one day, he mysteriously disappeared. The townspeople believed there was a secret behind his disappearance. Many recalled that before he vanished, the priest had begun to act strangely, growing more and more obsessed with the church. He had even forced the town's newcomers to enter the church. Then, one day, while trying to prevent a group of youths from entering, he grew furious and called upon a deep curse. The curse spread so quickly through the town that no one ever truly learned the full story of that day. As days passed, the villagers became increasingly cautious of approaching the church. No one dared to go near it at night, and soon, strange disappearances began to occur. Those who entered never came back, and the eerie sounds continued, feeding into the fear that the church had become a place of death. The town's bravest young man, Michael, decided that he would uncover the truth behind the curse. Late one night, when the town had fallen into a deep silence, he gathered his courage and made his way to the church. The wind had stopped, and only the pale moonlight illuminated the cobblestones of the street. With a deep breath, Michael pushed open the church's large wooden door and stepped inside. Inside, a cold and oppressive atmosphere hit him immediately. The air smelled of dust and decay, and an eerie silence filled the space. The church was a labyrinth of dark corridors and towering stone walls, each one heavy with the passage of time. Michael walked carefully toward the main hall, his footsteps muffled on the cold stone floor. The moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting strange, flickering shadows across the pews and walls. It felt as though the shadows themselves were alive, moving, waiting. He made his way to what was once the priest's room, a library of sorts, where the old priest had stored his sacred texts. The door creaked open, and Michael stepped inside. The room was cluttered with old books covered in dust. But something felt wrong. The silence was deafening, almost as if the room itself were holding its breath. Then, suddenly, faint whispers began to rise from the walls, chilling Michael to the bone. "Help me. Forgive me." They whispered in a low, indistinct murmur. He turned around quickly, his heart racing, and that's when he saw it, a figure standing in the darkness. The figure was pale, almost translucent, and dressed in tattered white robes. It was the ghost of Father Gregory, his hollow eyes staring emptily at Michael. The figure began to move slowly toward him, and Michael froze, unable to speak. The air grew heavier, the weight of centuries of guilt and fear pressing down on him. The ghost spoke, its voice faint and trembling. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to." Michael stepped back but found himself drawn to the figure. "Why?" he shouted, his voice filled with both anger and confusion. "Why did you do this?" The ghost's form flickered, as if caught between the worlds of the living and the dead. "Forgive me." It whispered again, its voice cracking. I was only trying to protect the church, the town." Michael, despite the fear coursing through him, found a strange strength within. "It ends tonight," he said firmly. "This curse ends here." As the words left his mouth, the ghost's form began to dissolve, slowly fading into the shadows. For a moment, the oppressive air lightened, and a sense of release filled the room. The curse, which had plagued the town for so long, seemed to lift, like a weight being removed from the very walls of the church. However, the next morning, the villagers learned that Michael had vanished. He, too, was never seen again. Days turned into weeks, and no trace of him was found. The town soon realized that, despite the curse being lifted, the church was still a place of terror. People began to stay away from it, unwilling to face what lingered there. Months later, the town still carried the weight of the church's dark past. No one spoke of the curse anymore, but the fear remained, deeply etched into the town's memory. St. Andrew's Church stood as a silent witness to the horrors of the past, but the townspeople never again ventured too close. It was said that sometimes, on moonlit nights, you could still hear the faint whispers coming from the church. And some claimed to see a pale figure standing in the doorway, waiting for someone to uncover the rest of its secrets.